The aftermath. On October 16, 2009, a boy by the name of Finn Carlton walked into the band room of my high school and closed the door behind him. He pulled a pistol from his coat pocket and fired 6 shots. Then he tied his belt around a pipe on the ceiling and hanged himself. 6 shots, 7 bodies. That's what the authorities found when they entered the room. Finn's victims were made to kneel in a straight line before they were executed, and their half-eaten lunches had been spoiled by the carnage. 6 rounds. 6 heads. 1 bullet each. Chloe Cannon, 15 years old, loved the color blue and played the French horn. Cute in a mousy sort of way. Unalived. Xavier Mayweather, 15 years old, on the track team, always rode his bike to school. Unalived. Ronald R.J. Saldes, 16 years old, had a notebook he sketched in, and already bought his tickets to the midnight premiere of the new Harry Potter movie. Unalived. Zach Trainer, 15 years old, 280 pounds, played the tuba. Refused, several times, to join the football team. Unalived. Marianne Ortega, 15 years old, barely spoke English and liked horror films. Unalived. Christopher Carlton, 16 years old, played the French horn, secretly dating Chloe Cannon. Unalived. By his older brother, no less. I didn't know any of these students in life, but I know them all too well in death. And I hate each one of them with my whole heart. This all went down during my junior year. Our school was closed for a few days, but it's amazing how quickly business as usual returns. A grief assembly, a memorial plaque in the band room, and bam, it's like everyone's forgotten. Everyone's moved on. Everyone except me. Myself, I never experienced grief. I didn't know any of these kids, and while I felt for my peers who were close to them, my life wasn't really affected by their gruesome ends. Sure, there was the existential shock, the life is fleeting realization, but I'd already lost a sibling in a freak accident years before. I was familiar with death. That's why, in the weeks following the tragedy, I didn't have any trouble sleeping. So there I was a month after the shooting, on a school night, not having any trouble sleeping. I had forgotten to silence my phone, so when I got a text, it buzzed on the wooden nightstand near my bed. Groggily, I rolled over to check it and was instantly jerked awake by what I read. "I'm going to unalive her, both of them, sure, why not?" Jesus, I muttered, eyes fixed on the macabre message, a threatening collection of black pixels backed by a heartless electric glow. I found a morbid fascination then, as I do now, in letters, meaningless squiggles, by themselves, which can combine to strike with more terror than the steepest cliff or the most menacing beast. The combination of these particular squiggles drilled a strangely familiar fear into my heart. I glanced to see what number the message had come from, but that field was blank. It appeared as though the text had not been sent by anything at all. Frantically, I hit reply. What? Who is this? I waited for a few minutes but received no response. Unsettled, I got out of bed and turned on the light. I wanted to do something, I just didn't know what. Finally, after staring around my room for a moment, I decided I'd splash my face with water. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. A good, long, hard look. Staring myself down, willing myself to get a grip. Finally, I splashed my face with the icy pour from the tap. I patted dry with a hand towel and went back into my room. My phone's LED was blinking from the nightstand. I'd received a text message. I shut the door, turned off the lights, and took a step toward my bed, wondering somewhat anxiously if the new message was a reply from whoever had sent the previous one. But I'd barely moved before I stopped dead in my tracks. I wasn't alone. There, hovering in front of my nightstand, faintly luminescent and barely visible, was a girl, a tiny, mousy-looking girl, a girl who was strangely pretty in a non-obvious way, a girl who would never celebrate her sweet 16 or stretch her undersized legs to reach the pedals of a car. A girl who was dead. Chloe Cannon wore a thin blue nightgown that reached her knees. Her feet did not touch my floor. She bobbed slightly, up and down in the air, seemingly staring not at me but at a point in the wall directly behind me. She appeared both solid and not. Her skin had a distinct silver pallor, yet I could see the light on my phone blinking through her torso. Her face looked vaguely sad. I could not move, I could not speak. We remained still, together, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I convinced myself that I was imagining things. I took a step toward her. Then another. Another. But not another. I could not bring myself to step closer, because as I neared her, her face began to change. Her left cheekbone began to sag. Her skull began to dent. Her eyeball began to rotate and protrude from its socket. A dark spot began to appear amid her fine, silvery hair. I backed away in horror and the bullet's fatal blow faded from sight as quickly and seamlessly as it had appeared. In a desperate panic, I flicked the light switch up. She was gone. I heaved a sigh of relief. I had been seeing things. I thought perhaps the shooting had affected me more than I'd let myself believe. Still, my knees wobbled, I could barely even stand. Bracing myself against the wall with my arm, I stared at the blinking notification light on my phone. Eventually, my curiosity over who had sent that morbid message was too much. I flicked off the light, no hovering girl, that was good, and scrambled into bed. Safely under my covers, I grabbed my phone and opened the second text message. This time, I found no morbid fascination in the squiggles before me. These 5 letters and 2 punctuation marks, backed by a harsh glow in the comfortless dark, carried only dread. Chloe smiled. I didn't know Finn Carlton. To this day, when people hear what high school I went to, they usually ask me if I was acquainted with the scrawny kid who unalived his brother and 5 others before stringing himself up in the pipes. They ask it with a sort of reality show fascination, and it feels like they're only asking so they can later tell their equally fascinated friends that they knew a guy who knew the guy. And their face always falls a bit when I say no, I didn't. I'd never seen him before. Of course, that's not entirely true. Finn didn't live too far from me, and we both walked home from school most days. I was a year younger than him, and we truly didn't know one another in the least. Not a word was ever exchanged between us. Still, I knew who he was. I stared at his backpack some days on my way home, black, with bright green trim. Green was my favorite shade. I have to admit, it was a pretty cool backpack. I suppose part of the reason I tell people I didn't know Finn is that it's simpler than going into detail about how I didn't know him, but I knew of him and sometimes stared at his backpack when I walked home from school. But there's another reason, too, and I'm reminded of it every time his victims come to me, when I'm scared and cold and in lonely moments. I'm ashamed. I check myself into a loony bin, pardon me, a psychiatric hospital, the year after I graduated. That's how bad things had gotten. I'd never seen Chloe again, but I'd seen all the others. By this point, Xavier and Zach chilled in my room practically every night. They never hurt me, but if I got too close, their faces would fall out of place and their death wounds emerge. If I'm being perfectly honest, they didn't scare me that much. They didn't seem to bear me ill will. Apart from that bizarre message the night I saw Chloe, they seemed content to merely hang about, and their presence had become almost comforting. If they were real, I figured I could handle that. No, what truly frightened me was the idea that they might not be real, that I might be out of my effing mind. All I wanted was to live a normal life. Xavier, Zach, and the others weren't getting in the way of that, but a mental illness certainly would. I thought it would be an easy process. Hey, doc, I'm going nuts, can you lock me up for a while and hit me with some meds? But it's not that simple. As it turns out, there's a lot involved in admitting oneself to the farm, not the least of which is a series of probing interviews with psychiatric professionals. I know they mean well, but in my experience, chats with these quacks usually do more harm than good. They drag up stuff that your mind hides, and sometimes your mind hides that stuff for a reason. I must have met a dozen people who went in for a 5-minute checkup and came out remembering how their uncle used to touch them when they were kids. For me, it didn't happen quite that way. I was in my third and final interview, this one with the head of the institution herself, when I finally remembered. It wasn't gradual. It came all at once. I broke down sobbing, realizing what I'd done, what responsibility I bore. It's a surreal experience, to forget. Not just to have something slip your mind, like where you put your keys, but to, truly, forget. I wish I had forgotten forever. Seeming a bit taken aback by my outburst, the hospital administrator signed a piece of paper and tried to hand it to me, telling me it would account for at least a 90-day stay. But I barely heard. I wiped the snot from my nose, blinking back tears, and stared behind her in horror, where Chloe Cannon hovered, the strange sad look still etched on her face. It was the first time I had seen her since that night, long ago, in my room. I pointed behind the lady, shrieking. She's there. She's there. Now thoroughly alarmed, the administrator whipped her head around, and then, apparently seeing nobody, pressed a button on her desk. The paper she had been trying to hand over fluttered to the ground. As the men in the white coats came to restrain me, I wrenched my gaze from Chloe and looked at the paper, face up on the concrete floor. And as they dragged me from the room, I saw a message written, in the unmistakable handwriting of a teenage girl, which the administrator had signed.